제 첨부 소단 힘이 정zon을 모는 첨부가 겨도 밖으로 담용 잔도 절마 tumba tuje janla ki shom sar ni chen ro zeng ni jeng gan se ja wo tuje shen lo yi la man jing me pen zo zhao la su ran de gong ju do ban po re shen ji lo.
The answer past profound and wonderful Dharma is difficult to encounter in billions of aeons. I now see it here, receive and uphold it, avow to fathom the knowledge true meaning, to liberate all beings, so thus generate the supreme bodhicitta. Let us now continue with our class on the wish-fulfilling treasury that's composed by omniscient Longchenpa. The wish-fulfilling treasury, we have already covered first 6 chapters. We're currently on the 7th, within which we have already talked about the various kinds of sufferings and happiness included in the samsara, in the 6 realms. We've talked about the suffering of the 3 lower realms and the suffering and happiness of the 3 higher realms. Currently, we are covering the happiness and suffering of the celestial or the heavens. Now, we have already covered the general explanation on the suffering and happiness of the celestial beings. Let's look at the explicit explanation over here. Mainly, the celestial beings have lots of enjoyments, and because of that, lots of people really want to take rebirth in celestial realm, and we would consider that to be reborn in heaven and in celestial realm, whatever you call it, is a very happy thing to do. It's just quite blissful. But there are still lots of sufferings in celestial realm. We will take a look at it according to Mipa Rinpoche's textual outline. There's the description of happiness and suffering. Let's look at the happiness first. Especially the ones living on the top of the mountain, the celestial beings. Because of the virtuous deeds, they take rebirth over there. Therefore, they are endowed with a great amount of merit and happiness. Previously, we mainly covered the happiness and suffering of the celestial beings of the desire realm. Some of the happiness and suffering of the celestial beings. And over here, we're going to cover the celestial beings that resides on the peak of Mount Sumeru. And these group of celestial beings, according to Tibetan lexicology, there are many different ways of calling them. For example, to call the sun, we would call that this is the loved one of the lotus flower. This is the bright eye of the world. There are different ways of describing it poetically. So, from the lexicology point of view, the way of calling the city in the Trishrimsha's heaven on the mountain peak is called the virtuous city. Now let's look at the characteristics of the city. In fact, there are a great amount of merits and happiness and beautiful infrastructures and groves and cities, as well as the marble rock that we talked about earlier, the wish-fulfilling tree. So those beautiful environments. On top of that, King Indra has many different consorts around him. The beautiful Devis would wear flowers and adornments surrounding the celestial realm. Surrounding that celestial realm, there are the houses and decks, as well as roads and groves, ponds, flower gardens. The devas and devis would sing and dance, as well as playing instruments. All kinds of all kinds of entertainments. When we think of the worldly entertainments, some of those places to enjoy, in some ways, there are times that we don't appreciate people who attend entertainments all the time. But from another aspect, that is just normal, because the celestial beings simply having lots of enjoyments because of their merits. And they have much better enjoyments than what we have because of their merits. The next verse over here says that the clever flying horse that is just like clouds, the exceedingly sturdy protector that is the miraculous elephant, which has 33 heads, and the celestial beings would be able to dance and have various kinds of entertainments and festivals that provides day and night long enjoyments. The celestial beings have the flying horse that could fly in the space just like clouds, and by relying on this horse or by riding on this miraculous horse, one would be able to travel and commute to the 4 great continents and make observation whether the beings are creating virtuous or the vice deeds. So by relying on this horse, one would be able to see the various kinds of situations and things that's happening in this world. There's also the exceedingly sturdy protector of the earth, the miraculous elephant. Usually, this is the elephant that. Usually, the exceedingly sturdy elephant is the one that the celestial beings would ride on when they are in a battle. And the protecting of the ground miraculous elephant is the elephant that provides all kinds of entertainment. In the Agana Sutra, as well as the creation of the world, Abhidharma, it talks about how there are a variety of entertainments available in Trishrimsha's heaven. For example, there is a tree, and after the tree blossoms, the celestial beings will start to go on field trips and start to gather together and have all kinds of entertainments. Indra would tell all of the celestial beings and said that this is a time that we can start to have all kinds of enjoyments. Let's enjoy. And then the protection of the ground miraculous elephant would manifest as an animal that has 33 heads. On each of the heads, there locates beautiful devis and gardens, groves, ponds, all of those infrastructures for recreational uses. Unlike the elephants that we see only has 1 head. The King Indra would be riding on the middle head and surrounded by 16 heads on each of his sides. On the other heads rides the ministers and princes. So the rest of the 32 heads would be the ride for all of the ministers and princes, and then they could go to any place that they would like to travel to. For example, the Marble Rock and the wish-fulfilling tree, also some of the gardens. After they arrive there, naturally there would manifest great numbers of elephants and beautiful horses, as well as ships for the celestial beings to have their the various recreational activities. On the back of each elephant, there could ride 10 devis, 10 devas, and more celestial beings even. By riding on the back of the elephant, they can travel to any place they would like to go. According to the Sutras and Shastras, it says that there are 4 months in the summertime the celestial beings would revel to have all kinds of enjoyment and amusements. The manifestations would naturally appear when King Indra just generated one thought of it. The elephant would naturally appear in front of him because it is simply an emanation out of his imagination, and he doesn't really have to do anything with great effort. The chariots, the horses, and all the elephants are quite miraculous, unlike how in this world, if we were to have a chariot, for example, a car or a horse, you would have to do a lot of work to maintain them. There's the insurance, there's the maintenance, and there's the annual checkups, and gas up for the car. Also, if you want to have a horse, it takes even more effort. And the horses are not really tame. It takes a lot of effort to tame them as well. But the elephants and horses of the Indra, they're quite tamed already. If you need them to ride them to any places, you can do that very quickly and very easily. The animals would naturally listen to the celestial beings. So inside this 4 month out of a year, the 4 months in celestial realm, which is about 12,000 years in human calculation, the human linear time. And then when it comes to the celestial beings, they would spend 1/3 of their time in enjoyments and amusements, and a part of their time would be engaging in battles, and then a part of their time would be worrying about their death and falling. So they would spend a long time. For the celestial beings, they spend a lot of time in enjoyments and distraction. If those of you want to spend your time in enjoyments and distractions and amusements, you can make aspiration to be reborn in Treasury heaven. There is no pressure. At least 1/3 of your life could be spent in carouse and leisure. There is no study and contemplation and practice at all. Anyhow, as we studied earlier, that the elephant has 33 heads, and on the 32 of them, there are the celestial beings that could serve the King Indra, and it could serve with all kinds of jewels and gardens and amusement parks and all kinds of distracting amusement activities day and night. Also, the celestial beings don't need to sleep as we do. In the human realm, we have a long period of time suffering than happiness. That is the main difference between the celestial realm to the human realm. But over here it says that the celestial realm mainly have their suffering comes from at the time of death and from battlefield. Let's look at the suffering of the celestial realm then. The suffering comes from at the time of death, when it comes to the time to migrate, also the time of having battles and warfare with the Asuras. Let it be the form realm celestial, the form realm heavens and the formless realm. The beings would suffer from death and fall into 3 lower realms. But of course, the form realm and formless realm doesn't have battlefields doesn't have battles or warfare with the Asuras, because they would mainly abide in dhyana, especially the heavens above the form realm. If we were to be reborn in form realm, then we would have no quarrels, no conflicts, no battlefields. It is only the greatest fear and greatest suffering comes at the time of death. Previously, we talked about the 5 signs of degradation in the celestial realm. For example, the flowers wither and then perspiration. Also, clothes would get dirty, and one would not want to stay at his or her own seat. Sometimes I joked that those of you who don't want to sit and meditate at your own home, it is really a sign of death. Because that's the sign in the celestial realm when you can't meditate and when you don't have such kind of ability to do so anymore. At that time, when death approaches for the celestial beings, the Devis and Devas would leave this particular person and would scatter flowers and started to say words of farewell, saying that, well, may you come back again. And then that's it. They would leave that person alone. This is really the gravest pain in the celestial realm for the celestial beings, because at that time they would be able to see through their divine eye, through their miraculous powers of the next rebirth of themselves being in the 3 lower realms. And then the next gravest pain for the celestial beings is to have a warfare with the non-celestial beings, which is the Asuras. This is not the human warfare like Afghanistan, Iraq, or Russia. The human realm warfare and killing, as well as stealing, all kinds of vicious deeds that human beings would conduct are correlated to the celestial realm warfares with Asuras. This is just a dependent arising. Whenever you see how the human realm is having quite a chaotic time, it is a signal to show us that the celestial beings are also having warfare with Asuras. Now let's look at the various kinds of warfares and descriptions of such of the celestial beings and the Asuras. Those of you who really like to talk about warfare. What was that? Huh? 谁呀？外面那么啊，窗户外面那么清楚啊！你啊，就这个，就所以我们这个战争啊，就是也是比较。In terms of warfare, people nowadays would pay lots of attention to it because there are warfares happening between different countries and within human civilization, and conflicts within family and among different people. But the most detrimental would be the kind of warfares or conflicts among the Vajrasangha, because that could definitely put a stop to the flourishing of Buddhism, as well as breaking the auspicious dependent arising. In terms of the warfare, in the celestial realm, there are 3 main causes. The first cause is that the sentient beings in Jambudvipa, if these group of sentient beings were to create lots of misconduct and create lots of negative deeds, that would lead to the conflicts of the celestial beings and the Asuras. The second reason for the the conflicts of the celestial beings with the Asuras is because of the tree. There is a great tree that took root in the Asura's realm, but flourishes in the upper realm, which is the celestial realm. In this way, because the celestial beings would be able to enjoy the fruition of the tree, the Asuras, out of jealousy, wanted to cut it out and wanted to fight over the fruition. This is the second cause. And the third cause is because the Asuras, though the males are not pleasant to look at, the females are really beautiful. So the celestial beings would generate lots of greed to constantly look at the Ashura women. And for that reason, the Ashura men would generate lots of jealousy. When we reflect upon it and look at the human beings, the human realm, on one hand, the human beings would grasp on food. On the other is desire. Mencius once said, food and sexual desire is the nature of human beings, and it's one of the biggest, are the two great downfalls of human characteristics. Confucius also once said that I had never met someone who longs for moral and high values than one longs for desire. For majority of people, I think desire would be very difficult to give up. Not only for human beings, in celestial realm, the beings are also like such. Meals and desire is the biggest desire for a person. That is according to the Book of Rites. So in the celestial realm, since the celestial beings would enjoy great nectar-like meals, and the Asuras are extremely jealous of it, at the same time, the celestial beings really like to look at the Ashura beautiful women, and then the Ashura men also got quite jealous and unhappy about it. In Jambudvipa, if the human beings were to create lots of chaos, such as warfare, all kinds of illicit deeds, and all kinds of immoral activities, the non-virtuous deeds, then the celestial realm would also start to have conflicts and warfares. So when there are lots of those non-virtuous activities happening in this human realm, it could lead to a great numbers of natural disasters and calamities. That is the sign of the disruptive powers of the Asuras. If we were to practice more virtuous deeds, then the whole world would enjoy all kinds of favorable conditions, such as good weather and good harvest, and everything would become very auspicious. This is just the natural law, and people who understand it, there are people who don't quite understand it. That is why we need to have more Dharma teachings so that it could guide people to practice more virtuous deeds and abandon the vicious deeds. Some people think that the Dharma, the Buddha Dharma, is not auspicious for the country or for the citizens in the country. That is only the people who don't understand the Dharma and don't understand the natural law. Let's look at how the war would look like. The beginning, the source of the conflicts would first start from the Naga's palace. There are two types of Nagas. One that appreciates the white deeds or the virtuous deeds, and the 8 great Naga kings some enjoys the virtuous deeds and some enjoys the evil. Sometimes I would look at people around us and I notice that there are people who naturally would lean to the virtuous deeds and some naturally lean to the vice. After being in contact with certain people, I noticed that definitely, I can see it very clearly, a group of people really like the virtuous deeds and some really like the vice. And that applies to the monastics as well. Though some people may wear the monastic robe, but after making the observation of those monastics' activities and actions, I noticed that their leaning is more towards the non-virtuous deeds. Let it be their personality and their actions and their characteristics. Sometimes it seems that their leaning towards the virtuous deeds would be greater than the non-virtuous, and some would be the other way around, or sometimes it would be equivalent, just like the ones we studied in mathematics, the greater, smaller, and equivalent. And that is true to the Nagas as well. Maybe because I get in touch with people a lot and I meet too many people, I'm not sure if I can confidently say that I see through people right away, but my impressions of the others are quite accurate. Let it be monastic or lay practitioners. Sometimes by the first impression, I would be able to know, oh, this person is rather not bad, and the other one, though, may appear to be a good person, but the mind, this person may have hidden agendas. Even if I can't be 100% certain, after conversing with the other party for a few minutes, or even after an hour, I would be really certain of my judgment of the personality of the other. The Nagas also has these two categories as well, the ones leaning towards the virtuous dharma and the other one not. So the warfare would first begin among the Nagas, either within the space or within the oceans. And there are various kinds of reasons for such conflicts. The 8 categories of the Nagas, following the 8 great Naga kings, would start to battle with each other, during which if one side would fail, the failing party would commute to, or would travel to ask for help from the Asuras or the celestial beings. If, for example, the non-virtuous ones won, then the virtuous side would seek for help from the Treasury celestial beings. But if the non-virtuous ones would seek for help from the Ashura kings, there are the 4 great Ashura kings. And the Ashuras live in the lower part of the Mount Sumeru. At the time of seeking for help, in some ways it's similar to the current war of Ukraine and Russia. When Ukraine is on the lower hand, then they started seeking for help from the West for weapons or for all kinds of equipment and infrastructure so that they can fight the Russians. And then I'm not sure where the Russians would seek help from. I don't know.
然后就像是那个，就是他们这个龙王的话呢，就是也是在那个就是天众当中呢，因为他们的很多的包括这个政权也好，部类也好，他们的包括这个财富也好，
including their reign and their different categories or the retinues as well as the wealth. Those are probably the main reasons of the cause of war.
阿修罗，就是一个呢就是照那个33
I think it's quite interesting to think about it. One group of the Naga kings would seek help from the Asuras and the other one from the Jewish dream heaven. And mainly because the thinking and their ways of conduct and their value systems are very different. Therefore, one would seek for help from the assurance and the other one from the celestial beings. So at the beginning, whenever the Nagas would have dispute with one another because of their different leaning of their ideas, their philosophies, or their value system, with such a little conflict, they would then emphasize on their different points of view and would elevate the warfare by engaging the celestial beings and Asuras into the battle as well. For example, the virtuous Naga kings, at the time of winning, the non-virtuous Naga kings would involve the Asuras to help them and would ask for their assistance. And vice versa, whenever the non-virtuous Naga kings were about to win, the virtuous Naga kings would seek help from the celestial beings. So it was started from the Naga kings, and then the celestial beings and Asuras would weigh in their particular powers and then engage into the battlefield too. Now let's look at the Asuras and the Naga king's battlefield. At the time when the virtuous Naga kings has already won this battle, the Asuras has already failed. The 4 heavenly kings would come. Over here, there seems to be a contradictory between the verses to the commentary. The virtuous Naga kings and the 4 heavenly kings would battle with the Asuras, and Rahura is one of the Asuras. At the time of winning the battle, which means that Rahura would fail, right? Or at the time, or maybe it means Rahura wins the battle. What does the commentary say? Can you look it up?
有没有？什么？在哪儿？对，他那个，那不是，公众是旁边各不同的不属了个你，然念他被那不属结了旁的真正接着，他们用不着身体做不了，第一次接触是，刚才那个。黑发龙的参拜，那么求助于天界，落后落入于战斗，然后当时飞天，飞天下面，这生出的做被旁边的真结局。
So over here it says it's the Rahura, after Rahura wins the battlefield, right? So we don't need to change it. Over here it means that the non-virtuous Naga kings, after they lost the battle, they would go to the Asuras and seek help from them. Rahura, which is one of the Asuras, would join the battle and help them to win the battle. At that time, the virtuous Naga kings would seek help from the four heavenly kings. The king of north, Vaisavana, would lead his army of yakshas, and of the south, the Varuhaka would lead his army of Kumbhandas, and the king Datarata would lead his army of Gandharvas, and then the king Virupaka would lead his army of Nagas. Nagas are quite complex in terms of the different dispositions of the Nagas, because there are Nagas that would live in the... There are the Nagas that has the leaning more towards the virtuous, and the ones leaning towards more of the non-virtuous. There are the Ashura Nagas, the human realm Nagas, the animal realm Nagas. So there are lots of different dispositions and Nagas living in different realms. Whenever we treat the natural springs and ponds and any water sources, we have to pay attention, because if we were to irritate the Nagas living there and disturb them, they could hold a grudge for a very long period of time, and then they're quite revengeous sometimes. The Naga spring over here we have is probably a little bit better. The Naga king is a bit better because it was tamed by His Holiness Dudrum Rinpoche, the first Dudrum Rinpoche. But we still have to be careful not to contaminate the water source with our drainage. You have to be very careful, especially the male practitioners over here. Dudrum Rinpoche, at the time of taming the Nagas, in the autobiography of the first Dudrum Rinpoche, he stated that how the Naga king also harmed his family members and relatives. The four heavenly kings would lead the army of the Yakshas, the Kumbhandas, Gandharvas, and Nagas, with all of the great armies over there. They would all engage in intense battling with the Asuras. And then all the Asuras, all the way between the white garland and the upholder of garland to the fragrant garland. So in another word, the whole army is completely annihilated and completely destroyed. In terms of the fight, the war between the celestial realm to the Asuras, I think there is more of an extensive description in the Sutra of Right Mindfulness. The war between the Asuras and the celestial beings are very much correlated and very much related to the human realm as well, because if human beings were to practice more virtue, then the celestial beings would definitely be able to win the battle. If the human beings were to uphold vicious activities and practice more of the vice, then the Asuras would win the battle. This is correlated because of dependent arising. Sometimes we would say that, oh, this person got ill, and we would say that being ill could be a sign that the Nagas or spirits are harming this particular person. So this person, at the time of chanting mantra or release life to accumulate merit or practice any kinds of virtuous deeds, with this kind of dependent arising, the Nagas and Asuras would be benefited from such positive deeds, and then then their mind, their harmful mind would naturally cease and their virtuous mind would naturally arise. Also, in the celestial realm, the deities or the devas of practicing the virtue would gain strength from it. Even within the Asuras, there are a group of them who practice the virtue, and of course, another group that practice the vice mainly. But if we were to practice more virtue as human beings, then that would strengthen the celestial beings as well as all the beings that enjoys virtuous deeds. So, if we want to create more virtue and auspiciousness in human realm, then we should eliminate the non-virtuous deeds as much as possible. Otherwise, we would have to swallow the bitter fruit that we plant ourselves, which would be quite sad. And that could lead to the whole environment and whole world to dwell in suffering and fear. That's part of just the causes and conditions, how things are. We should be quite clear of that now. The whole battle started from the Naga kings. Sometimes we can see how the wars would broke out in this world. At first, it was probably just some discourse or just some disagreements and some conflicts within a small region, and slowly would ripple out to other countries, and then the other countries would take sides, which is exactly the echoing or the mirroring of the war. Started all the way from the quarrels between the Naga kings, and then ripples and evolves the Asuras and the celestial beings to join in the battle, and eventually led to the four heavenly kings who would join into the whole battle as well. Now, the next verse over here says that after failing miserably, the Ashura king would start the war, which shakes the Mount Sumeru, and the kings as well as the princes would go to the coarse and vicious grove to put on their armors and ride on the sturdy elephant as well as all the celestial soldiers to fight with the Asuras. At the time of battling to the Asuras, later, because of the four heavenly kings and their armies have such great power, the Ashura and the non-virtuous Dharma Naga kings as well as their retinues would lose miserably. Within Asuras, there is one particular king that has great aggression, and then at the time of stomping on the golden ground, the whole Sumeru would shake. In fact, the whole world would shake at a variety of situations. For example, when the bodhisattvas enters into the next bhumi. For example, the first bhumi bodhisattva enters into second or third, and then the eighth bhumi bodhisattva, or when a bodhisattva enters into the eighth bhumi, then there's the earthquake, there's the shake of the ground. When a Buddha attains attainment, and there are various emanation of that Buddha in the world, there's also the shake of ground. Another situation is whenever a person practices when a person who committed the 5 heinous crimes, and at the time of falling into the hell realm, there is also a shake of the ground, or a great master at the time of attaining rainbow body, the earth would also shake. In lots of the great biographies of the great masters of the past, there's the description of how the earth would shake, and there's the earthquake. Those are because at the time of when there's a great amount of merit and and a great amount of non-virtuous deeds are matured, there's the shake of the ground. That's just a sign that happens in this world. So over here it says that at the time of the battle, the celestial beings of the Asuras, when they're battling, there's also the ground shake. And then the King Indra would feel that shake and then would make observation through his divine eye. And he would notice that, oh, the four heavenly kings now angered the Asuras and started to fight. And then the Asuras are quite aggressive now. So if the Trishrimshas heaven if the retinues of the Trishrimshas heaven do not help out in this situation, the four heavenly kings may lose the battle. Therefore, at the time he would send those celestial beings to enter the army, to join the army, just as how a little while ago Ukraine asked all the males in the country, male citizens all the way above 18 years of age and below 72 to enter the army. At that time, all the celestial beings, other than those of the celestial beings who are about to die, better not to come to the battlefield. The rest of them would be trained and then enter into the battlefield as well. Part of their preparation to enter into the battlefield is to make observation of various kinds of phenomena. The celestial beings would go to this jeweled throne that's right underneath the wish-fulfilling tree. From there, they would be able to make observation of various kinds of situations. And after looking at those signs and omens, the celestial beings would go to the vice and vicious grove, which would evacuate them to generate the aggressive mind. Because initially, the mind of the celestial beings are actually quite peaceful. It's very difficult for them to generate aggression. But after entering into this particular grove, they would be able to generate aggression. Nowadays, I think there's this particular helmet where it stimulates certain parts of the brain or certain part of the neural links, which would stimulate the neural links so that the feelings of depression and of sadness would go away. And there are some people, after wearing those helmets, they would generate a sense of heroism and being quite fearless. Some medicines also works the same way. And this kinds of cause and conditions, this kinds of dependent arising is indeed quite incredible. And we can understand this growth in a similar fashion. Just like how there are people after entering into a monastery or stay in a monastery for a long period of time, initially they may have lots of aggression, but after staying for a period of time, their aggression would be pacified. So similarly, the celestial beings originally being quite peaceful, after entering into this grove of vicious and of coarseness, and then they would be stimulated to generate a great amount of aggression. So over there, they would put on the armors, which is similar to the military costume nowadays that we have, and then they would ride on top of the extreme sturdy elephant. The heavenly king would sit in the middle, and the princess would sit on the 32 other heads. And some of the elephants would have 7 heads instead of 33, and some said 6. According to some of the sutras, it says that there are the elephants with 6 tusks, but over here it says that they have 7 tusks, and on each of the tusks there are groves and ponds and springs, as well as 7 beautiful devis. They would sing and dance which creates quite a cheerful environment, a cheerful atmosphere for the soldiers to go to the battlefield. The Asuras, after seeing the Devis, they would generate a great greed and also want to have those Devis at the same time with great aggression. So they start throwing all kinds of weapons, such as the Vajras and jeweled wheels, all of those kinds of things. The celestial beings are rather much taller because of their merit, and the Asuras are much shorter because of the lack of merit. So it's very difficult for them to throw weapons upwards. But the celestial beings would be throwing their weapons downwards. When the human beings would fight each other, for example, the smart ones would always stand on the top and attacking to the one who stands at the lower, which is quite smart. So when we look at the battles between the Asuras and the celestial beings, we can see that that's the way they would fight each other. The weapons they would throw at each other are like the Vajras and the jeweled wheels, all of those kinds of blades and so on. And they have great amount of strength. Unlike sometimes when human beings have conflicts, I notice that people tend to throw their shoes and hats, which is really not that horrifying. Anyhow, at the time the celestial beings are attacking the Asuras also would be attacking back. When it comes to wounding the celestial beings, other than if there's any detrimental harms to their heads, that they won't survive anymore, but other parts of the body, if it was harmed, the celestial beings using their nectars, they would be able to get healed right away. The demigods, the Asuras, because their lack of merits, let it be losing an arm or a leg or any of those kinds of harms would lead to death. For human beings, of course, if we lose our heads, we will die. But if we were to lose our hands and legs, we would usually not. Nowadays, some of the veterans, after battling in a war and come back to their home country, they are the ones who lost an arm or a leg, and then they would receive the honor of being a hero. But our Asuras are completely different. They would lose their life after losing an arm or a limb or so. But at that time, they would be able to shake the whole ground. Even the king of the mountains would become the dust. And then the whole Jambudvipa would have all kinds of smog and mist, also filled with various kinds of sounds. That is because the Asuras also belong to the disposition of the animals. Throughout the battling process, at the times of looking at the sun and the moon, sometimes it hurts their eyes. Therefore, they would try to gather all kinds of smogs and mists and fogs to cover it up. Another way of describing it was the reason of the sun and lunar eclipse. It is because of the Rahura sees the sun and the moon being way too bright to his eyes. In terms of the sun and the solar eclipse, some said that at the time of Bodhisattva attaining a bhumi, or there's the change between the vice and the virtue, or there's a time for war, there would be such phenomena happening. There's another description saying that a type of whale or a type of really giant fish, at the time of turning the body, there would be earthquake happening. Of course, Longchenpa simply introduced these kinds of descriptions, but did not verify or validify any of this. At the time of solar and lunar eclipse, there are different ways of describing the causes for it. Anyhow, at that time, if the celestial beings were to win the battle, then in the whole world would have all kinds of virtuous, auspicious signs, such as timely rains and abundant harvest of crops, no illness in the world, no war and no conflicts. This is a sign of the winning of the celestial beings. But look at the world nowadays. Maybe the Asuras are winning the battle, because we can see that the crops are withering because of the abnormal weather. I noticed some of the crops are already withered around the Serpa area, and the meadows that used to be really green nowadays used to be quite flourished and prosperous. Not only over here, but in Europe, in North America, even some lakes are completely dried up. And some of the rivers, because of the level of the rivers are so low, lots of giant rocks with inscriptions on it started showing up, saying that if you see me, the time of hunger and famine or time of drought is here. It is time for you to cry. And then there is some ancient date inscripted on it as well. From the various kinds of signs of the world, we can see that because of the calamities of the weather and because of the various kinds of conflicts that's happening, maybe the Asuras are winning, hopefully. And we can see, definitely, in the past few years, the Asuras and the celestial beings had been in battle. Hopefully, we can practice so that the celestial beings would win over, and you should try your best, and we will practice diligently virtuous deeds to help you. Don't worry. Now, let's continue. Over here, it says that the Asuras, after winning the battle, they would reach to the peak of the the peak of the mountain Sumeru. Previously, we talked about how celestial beings had already won the battle, and now the Asuras, after winning the battle, they would go all the way up to the peak of Sumeru. After the Asuras goes all the way to the peak of Mount Sumeru, the city of virtuous seeing has to be closed. So the gate of the city would be closed after closing for 7 days and 7 nights. The celestial beings at that time probably feel quite trapped, all the poor celestial beings. But we can definitely empathize with the celestial beings at that time, because sometimes we would have to stay in retreat for 7 days and sometimes longer than that. The celestial beings also had to do that, and sometimes they would have to close their gate of the city, and they would have to stay indoor for 7 days. Compared to that, we're doing okay. Even the celestial beings in the Trishrimshas heaven had to stay indoors after being chased by the Asuras. I think we should feel quite relaxed about our situations. Today I heard some of the tourists, after coming here and not knowing that the little red huts are private residence. So some of them would start dancing on top of those houses, and the people living here would ask them not to dance on top of the houses and saying that you're dancing on top of someone's roof. And the tourists sometimes had no idea of it. I jokingly said that I wish we still have the old roofs, because the old roofs were made of a thin layer of yak felt. And if you were to stand on top of it, you would fall right through it. In the past, I remember that the yaks would walk right on top of that thin layer of roof and then fall through and stays inside the hut, because the yaks wasn't able to get out of the little huts because the doors are really narrow and small. So to get the yaks out of the hut, you have to get rid of the door first, get rid of the door frame at the same time. But the yaks had no idea of the situation, therefore they would stay inside the little hut and start eating all the food that's stored by the owner, such as tsampa and so on. Anyhow, at the time when the celestial beings are being under the lockdown for 7 days, there's a voice that comes through the space saying that may the celestial beings triumph and may the Asuras fail. And because of this particular message, the celestial beings all of a sudden would win the battle, because the Asuras would vanish all of a sudden. After a period of time, since the celestial beings triumphed, therefore, they would chase all the Asuras into their city, and the Asuras would lock themselves inside their city for 7 days and 7 nights. And then in that space, there comes the voice saying that may the Asuras triumph and the celestial beings fail. And then the Asuras would come out, and then the celestial beings would go back to their own place. Whenever, as practitioners, we were to encounter those obstacles, I'm not sure if there are voices coming through the space and help us out. Anyhow, over here, to continue, it says that the celestial beings and their Asuras are in the conflict. There are lots of sufferings, and the cowards would run away. At the time of having the battles, there are lots of great sounds and precipitations in the world. The whole world will become really chaotic, filled with great winds and filled with warfare, which would cause great fear in the world. Some of the weak ones would get really terrified and even would faint. Just like those people over here, upon meeting some of those unfriendly people, and at the times of obstacles, some of the faint-hearted get very scared. So similarly, the celestial beings, during the warfare between the celestial beings and the Asuras, many would get quite terrified, and lots of worry, lots of fear would generate. According to the Jakarta tales, where it talks about at every place there are, at any of the place in samsara, they are filled with terror. For example, the celestial beings, because they have a solid grasping of dwelling in happiness, and then the Asuras, because they have jealousy and have grasping towards each other, also would lead to wasting their life in battlefields and experiencing such kinds of suffering for human beings, because we have such great grasping towards the 8 worldly dharmas, and therefore lead to the squandering of our life. The hungry ghosts, as you know, because hungry ghosts they're quite stingy and have lots of grasping, which led to the thirst and suffering, and their life would wither in the mud of the samsara for the animals, because of their ignorance and eating each other and consuming each other. Therefore, they would spend their life in suffering as well. Don't even mention about hell realm. There's the extreme heat and extreme coldness, as well as the hell realm, where the beings would experience a great loneliness. So all of the beings in the 6 realms endure all kinds of suffering. It is only to seek for the path of liberation could lead us out, guide us out of the fog of samsara. Therefore, the wise ones would seek for liberation. According to Mipa Rinpoche's textual outline, it is the conclusion on explanation of the 3 sufferings. Such samsara is just like a fire pit. The wise ones should practice on the path of liberation. Longchenpa over here teaches the later disciple to practice on the path of liberation. Previously, we talked about the suffering and happiness of the beings living in samsara. Mainly, they experience suffering. According to Vinaya Sutra, it talks about how there is no coolness and peace inside of a fire pit. For the same reason, there is no comfort and bliss within samsara. According to the Lotus Sutra, it also talks about there is no comfort and peace that can be found inside the 3 existence, just like a house on fire that is filled with all kinds of suffering and terror. So the whole samsara is just like a fire pit. All kinds of sufferings are infused in it, and all kinds of terrifying experiences are within it. Therefore, the wise ones should come to this definitive aspiration to be liberated from the suffering ocean of samsara. So, as we've talked about previously, one should practice first to generate the mind of renunciation, knowing that samsara doesn't have any intrinsic meaning and there is no peace in it. And then secondly, you need to generate the mind of bodhicitta, knowing that to liberate alone doesn't have any meaning in it, but to lead the sentient beings to liberation. And then you can practice on the non-dual wisdom and practice on the supreme Vajrayana. The samsara does not have any place that one can place one's trust. It may appear to be comfort and happiness, but it will eventually change into suffering. It is constantly rotating just like the water wheel. Therefore, one should practice diligently to liberation. At the end of each chapter, Longchenpa would give a short summary, and through the previous analysis and study, we should understand, we should come to this understanding that there's nothing trustworthy within the samsara. So we should generate the mind of renunciation. If you can use your wisdom to make the observation, you would notice that there is really only the suffering and the causes of suffering that's accumulated throughout samsara. This is the truth of accumulation. And because of the karma that's accumulated, one would experience all kinds of suffering and happiness. And this is the teaching on the truth of suffering. And with the practice to eliminate suffering, this is the truth of the path, and then you would be able to see the wisdom that is within, that is the truth of the cessation. You you can see that there is really no happiness and peace within this world, let it be the animate or the inanimate. Maybe it appears to be that the four dhyana heavens are filled with bliss, but after the karma, that kind of virtuous karma being exhausted, then the beings would step into the three lower realms as well. When you look at the beings in the desire realm, some of the the celestial beings and human beings, they may appear to be quite wealthy and well endowed, but these kinds of experiences are simply temporary and they will eventually turn into suffering. There are different examples given about samsara. According to Madhyamika Avatara, for example, it says that the samsara is just like a water wheel. There is no way to get out of it, or the bee that's been trapped inside of a bottle. Our samsaric world is just like a water wheel. There is no way to get out of it, or there is no better place that it would lead to. According to the sutra, I believe according to a sutra, it says that without a spiritual guide, one will not know the appropriate way of making the right aspiration. That is why we're still very much dwelled in samsara. Without a spiritual guide, one will not be able to make the right aspiration. Without such aspiration, there is no way to attain liberation from samsara. We would still be drowning in samsara. If within our life, if we had never encountered a teacher, had never encountered the right dharma, how many kalpas it will take us to attain liberation, it's very difficult to say. But now, in this lifetime, since we've already relied on the spiritual teacher, we should make good aspiration, engage in practice diligently. I don't dare to say that everyone would be able to attain liberation right away, but at least we've planted a seed of liberation, and in the near future, it will definitely come to fruition. There is such great hope to it. In this great ocean of samsara, we should generate this mind of liberation and practice diligently. Look at Longchenpa. He said that there is nothing trustworthy inside samsara. There is nothing that we should desire for to admire inside samsara. So we should generate such a great renunciation. You can see that people such as Phuntsog Rinpoche, after relying on his teacher for 5 or 6 years, he had generated such kind of merit inside his mind stream. But of course, we can't compare ourselves to His Holiness, but at least we also have all of those favorable conditions, so we should practice diligently. Now we have completed the 7th chapter.